Thanks, everyone. I guess I should leave the lights up for Bradley. Thanks for being here for Spring Quarter 2025 Lamont Colloquium. We have three presenters today. The first is Bradley DeLucia. Bradley is at the end of his first year as a composition master student here at DU. He's a prolific creator of not only music, but intellectual writings, respectively coming from deep passions for beauty and truth, which we can all support. Spurred by a natural curiosity for the human condition and hastened by his experiences with and against the contemporary culture of art, he spends his off time in private study, the primary fields being philosophy, psychology, world history, anthropology, and plenty of the things in between. He's spent a better part of the last decade in trying to understand the origins, limitations, and trajectories of modern beliefs and what we ought to do about them, if anything at all. So the title of Bradley's talk is The Values of Music, Intramusical and Extramusical. Please join me in welcoming Bradley DeLucia.
Hello, thank you all for coming. I was told yesterday by a professor that since I'm tall and deep-voiced, I could say anything and it'll sound intellectual. But if you pay attention and look for fallacies, you can prove them wrong. So, thank you for the introduction. The definitions and discourses around why music is valuable seems to be ineffably muddled. What does one mean, colloquially or academically, when they speak about the use, abuse, worth, or worthlessness of music, or qualities to music? What is music's telos? Telos, for those who don't know, is a Greek word which means the final cause of a thing. It's an Aristotelian term, which means the purpose for its existence, the end to which it is striving by the fact of existing. Our cultural discourse has many ready-made answers to this question, and to spoil the fun, these are all unsatisfactory. Before even approaching a potential answer, there are many preliminary questions, which are just as sidelined as the initial question. Do we value things by their construction or by their effects? By what they are or by the result, by intention, by intrinsic or extrinsic traits and factors? To name just one example, the popular debate of art versus artist will always continue so long as there are people who believe that there is a standard to be found somewhere between these two poles, intrinsic and extrinsic traits. Most, if not all, of such medians are arbitrary. Furthermore, is music moral? Is it merely a matter of tastes? And in that case, are tastes moral? And if so, in what ways? Pretending as if the above questions have already been settled, I've compiled a list of 8 common answers to the question on what is the telos of music. Now, these apply not just to music, but to all of the fine arts, but I think when it's used especially for music, and particularly absolute music, being the non-representational medium it is, the beliefs often prove themselves to be wholly unreasonable. Bear in mind that each and every one of these that I'm going to describe has a glimmer of truth, but for the sake of time, I will come back to these rebuttals at the end. Number 1, hedonism. The belief that music or art's telos is to provide pleasure. Now, pure hedonism enforces short-term, imprudent, and thus destructive behavior, and so if art served only that function, it would rightly be seen as a danger to all civility. I suppose an example of that inaction would be the tramplings and suffocations at music festivals and mosh pits. Epicureanism, on the other hand, is a more enlightened intellectual form of hedonism. It posits that pleasure is indeed the goal of life, but it must be parsed out for maximal long-term effect, leading, to the surprise of some, to a highly prudent and measured way of life, which I presume art could be a part of. But this still begets the question, what makes music pleasurable? And like which kinds of music? To what degree and by what means, by what faculty does music or art produce pleasure? Furthermore, we clearly do not go to art merely for pleasure, for many times we intentionally expose ourselves to quite opposite affects and will even pay for the privilege to do so. Number 2, escapism, the belief that its telos is to escape from one's woes, or at times, even one's duties. It assumes that life is negative or a zero-sum game, something to be escaped from time to time. Has anyone ever uttered the phrase, "I'm too happy and fulfilled to listen to my favorite song right now"? Right. The zero-sum view, maybe if it's a really sad song, I don't know. The zero-sum view is perhaps unfalsifiable, since there is no real way to rid ourselves of undesirable things in life completely. And so some desire to escape, maybe even unconsciously, will likely always be present, barring some exceptional amor fati or stoicism. And perhaps that's right, Marcus Aurelius seems to despise music in his writing. To the zero-sum view, I asked this rhetorical question: is heaven, metaphorically or otherwise, an escape from Earth, or is it rather Earth's apotheosis? I ask this just to show that the former belief is no more of a leap of faith than the latter. It requires just as many a priori assumptions. Furthermore, escapism often connotes low or cheap forms of entertainment, which begets our original question in a different form. What begets high from low, art from entertainment, if there is such a distinction? Number 3, didacticism, the belief of a stereotypical, strict, Puritan conservative, like every Charles Dickens or Footloose villain. Art is not for pleasure, but for learning. But also in the non-caricatured and the more fair sense, didacticism asserts that art means to tell us something useful. Also, even in said caricature, one can see that that is an answer to the pitfalls of hedonism and escapism. There's an argument by the late aesthetic philosopher and part-time composer, even Sir Roger Scruton, that something like a textbook is engaged with in order to gain the information contained within. Again, it's didactic by its design. And when one has engaged with it for the information successfully, one no longer has any need for the textbook. However, aesthetic experiences, for instance, art or the beauty of nature, is not like that. These instead beckon for repeated exposure throughout life. If it is teaching something at all, it is teaching something which seems to be forever at arm's length. What are we being taught in the case of a piece of absolute music? What does sonata form teach us about ourselves, or how would it direct us toward being better people? Joseph Stalin's favorite piece of music was reportedly Mozart's 23rd Piano Concerto. And for that matter, while we're in these waters, the Germans in the 1930s were arguably the most educated population on the planet at that time, not just in the sciences, but the humanities. It's deeply uncomfortable to pronounce, but education does not bring virtue or morality necessarily. Number 4, l'art pour l'art, which is French for art for the art's sake, is the motto of the Bohemian sort of school, not Czech, but like Bohemians. It's art. Art is to be free from all pretenses of social norms and utilitarianism. This is reactionary to the prudish forms of didacticism, as in it claims that art must be independent of all considerations for scandal or education. As the saying goes, art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. It's a quote by Cesar A. Cruz. This belief, l'art pour l'art, is apophatic, which means that it's born solely from negative definitions, from negations, and as such it has no positive definitions to justify itself. Why make the art without the need of the audience or even the artist? Why do humans thus feel the need to create art or engage with art if it is only for itself? Do we thus owe something to the art? Why? Who determined that? Why is art good in and of itself as a fact? The whole category, art, or which types of art, if not. But who determined any of that? This is obviously not the means by which artists and audiences interact with and evaluate art. It's primarily a means of ignoring propriety, for better and worse. Number 5, social utility, or social direction. Plato believed that good music created virtuous emotional states, and bad music created weak and evil emotional states. Thus, in his vision of a utopia in the Republic, it would have strict control over the modes allowed to be played to that population, literally like Dorian, Ionian, Aeolian. We may find this silly, but that kind of approach has not left us fully. Vladimir Lenin, for one preeminent example, believed that art was a tool to further propaganda of the state. Every artwork should, as an imperative, exemplify the revolution and the communist state, and everything else is unforgivable. That's not unique to him, but he's a particular example. That belief and line of thinking follows from didacticism. If we switch and see what follows from escapism, one need only think of the infamous Roman maxim, give them bread in circuses and they will never revolt. Music is presumably part of that circus. You don't have to worry about your autocratic government if you have subsidized bread, spectacles, and hedonism to wash it down. Number 6, awareness. This is similar to didacticism, but has a less concrete goal and it has less concrete means, though it is often just as moralistic, sometimes even more so. I've split it into two different subcategories. 1, to start a conversation, and 2, to elevate the mundane. Creative people, like all people do from time to time, find salience, meaning, and inspiration in places totally unsought and unexpected. For instance, Einstein looking at window cleaners and wondering if they would feel anything if they fall. That was the spur that led to the theory of general relativity. Or more famously, Newton's apple, or Sibelius seeing a flock of swans hover above his head and coming up with the Fifth Symphony. There are countless examples. As such, the argument that good art shines a light on certain mundane aspects of life is accurate, but proves to be a rather arbitrary and unaccountable measure of art, at least taken on its own. If one pairs this with the l'art pour l'art belief, then perhaps such a believer of both teleologies would confess that that is precisely the point, to be arbitrary and unaccountable. Certainly the Frankfurt School thinks so. This may in fact be the most common belief of all of these I list today of the world's artistic intelligentsia of modern times. When a layman, so to speak, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but when an uneducated in the arts person goes and sees a modernist artwork in a museum and says indignantly, anyone could do that, one of the stock responses by the initiated is, yes, but the point is that they did do it. Another such stock response is, oh, but the context of the work being placed in a museum illuminates and showcases this mundane thing, or validates or starts a conversation about, etc., etc. These two classes of people hold completely different teleologies of art, and until they understand and admit it, or one side quits museums entirely, hint, hint, these arguments will continue fruitlessly forever. In summary, anything can start a conversation, and for that matter, anything can teach you if you endeavor to perceive it. Number 7, historical importance, which I again split into two. The first being obeyance to a zeitgeist, that art is valued, which art is valued, is relative to the time and place in which it is happening. This is a consequence of social fiat. Now that's a term that I've coined, so I'll explain. Fiat means, it's usually used for money or currency, which is left the gold standard, and in Latin it means, let it be done. Thus, social fiat means, if enough people believe it, then it is so. You may like to scoff at this, but there's not a single person in this room or in any of our lives that does not act off of this principle in greater or lesser degrees. It is the cause of every fashion, every fad, every mass hysteria, bystander effect, and most social behaviors indeed. As an example, in the case of art, do you think most people who take pilgrimages to see the Mona Lisa get a strong aesthetic experience from the site? This is anecdotal evidence, but I know that I don't. Do you think that most of those attendees will wait in line for hours and hold phones up and take a picture of themselves with the picture? Do you think they understand that Da Vinci was synthesizing all of the multifaceted fields that he famously studied in his life, where he would dissect corpses to study the optic nerve, and that's why if the mouth of the Mona Lisa is in the peripheral vision, it looks like a smile, but not if you look directly at it. Do they know that Mona Lisa is an anagram of anima soul, which is an alchemical term, which means the most sublimated version of the feminine within the masculine psyche, which he would have known about. Alchemy were quite popular back then. Like I know all of that, but I still don't feel anything off of it. And most people, they'll just go because it's famous. It has this inertia to it. Why would you not go and see the Mona Lisa? I am probably, again, as an anecdote, but I personally am probably the most reflexively anti-social fiat person I know, just personality-wise. I kind of find it repulsive. That's not a value judgment. It's just a reaction. But even if I were in the Louvre, why would I not look at it? Even if I don't get an aesthetic experience off of it, it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Point being, at its extreme, this view in zeitgeist justifying value or teleology, at its extreme is the belief of a caricature of a cynical marketeer. Well, what's hot right now with the kids? Indeed, things do gain undue momentum just because they are popular, but that does not mean that it is wholly arbitrary. Any given snowball, metaphorically, exists for a reason. It started in a particular place and time, satisfied certain criteria to be created, and is there in spite of all the other potential snowballs, even if you're in a very massive plain full of snow. If it is not the obeyance of zeitgeist that makes for this teleology of historical importance, then another alternative is that one often believes is that the telos is to be found in the generation of a new zeitgeist. The assumption being that zeitgeists are inevitable, positive, and yet malleable to the will of artists and geniuses, which is a little bit of a self-contradiction, but there is nuances to that. This invokes a belief called historicism, which is the mythos, I would even say the religion, a secular religion, but still a religion, of modernity and post-modernity by extension. That history has a trajectory, and that trajectory is one of moral progress. I'll hone in on the argument for art, but it is based on a cherry-picked view of history, that every good artist was revolutionary, therefore most were misunderstood in their time, and thus to be great one must break new ground, and thus this belief results in an obsession of novelty pour novelty, pun intended. It has a messianic but also strangely solipsistic view, as if to say, zeitgeist is valuable and inscrutable, it's beyond reproach, but I, the artist, am able to change it, and thus, presumably, the sheep will follow this uniquely creative individual. Both of these historical teleologies, whether it's obeyance to an evaluation under zeitgeist or spurring and changing zeitgeist, both of these live under the exact same premises and a priori assumptions as a teenage faddist. Again, the merits or values of art in their own right are unaccounted for, although with the teenage faddist, at least the novelties are genuinely popular. Number 8, self-expression. And notice how this belief exactly contradicts the other popular modern belief about zeitgeist. The idea of a zeitgeist would make absolutely zero sense if everyone were to express their uniqueness and individuality to the full. In any case, what is self and what is expression? How can one not self-express if you are yourself and you are expressing? And what is innately valuable about it in any case? Perhaps what people are gesturing at with that sentiment is that one should be true to themselves, but that assumes that were everyone to do so, things would improve. I don't necessarily contradict this, but I mean to show where the assumptions are. This belies a certain Rousseauian, or perhaps simply optimistic, assumption that humanity is naturally good as a default, although that is far from definitively proven. To that, I'll just say, I suppose if Ted Bundy or Jeffrey Dahmer, or insert award-winning celebrity name here, were honest and open about themselves, things would indeed be better for humanity, namely because they'd be taken out of reach of the general public much more quickly. So, there ends the list. What is the error that underlies all of these telos theories that I have just described? The answer is what I will term left-brained materialist pigeonholing, which is really 3 ways of saying the same sentiment. We, culturally, writ large, evaluate for qualities of things, narrow down that indefinite list to one or two, then qualify the value of things based on that trait and nothing more. We are clinically monomaniacal. Our culture has a disorder in which it reflexively rationalizes all gestalts out of existence. We lose sight of the most commonsensical, bare-bones, subjective facts of meaning, affect, awe, beauty, transcendence, consolation, sublimation, just to name a few. These things are hardly material nor measurable. Ironically, we escape empirical reality in the name of empiricism. Even something like self-expression is so mystical and weighty and abstract and subjective, we manage to arbitrate and commodify through our mimetic use of the term. There is something accurate, true even, in all the beliefs I've described, but they are all insufficient on their own or even combined together. Might I suggest a certain skeleton key to rein them all? I don't suppose that this is the only thing that would make me know better than these left-brain pigeonholers, as I call them, although slightly less materialistic. But this skeleton key I will propose is something I will say, for convenience, is sublime beauty in art. 1, indeed, it can provide hedonic pleasures. 2, it can be used as an escape. 3, beauty, even on its own, or in an abstract medium like instrumental music, can be didactic, because by its very essence, beauty teaches the existence of phenomenological perfection. There are better and worse things in the world, is what that teaches us. Beauty tells us that the sublime is attainable here on earth. 4, for that reason, l'art pour l'art is correct insofar as it points to the fact that true beauty is an end and not a means to anything. Nowhere is this more obvious than in absolute music. Thus, the belief 5 in political utility and social directing understands the power that beauty has, for all of the above reasons, in captivating, motivating, and transforming people. The cynical belief of Voltaire was that, quote, anything too stupid to be said is sung, end quote, which is gesturing at 6, music elevates the mundane. Beauty can create awareness for the above reasons. It can, 7, generate a zeitgeist, and it can, insofar as the beauty is a result of social fiat, which I do contend, although this may just be a personal opinion, to be a lesser form of beauty. It can be conditioned by the reigning zeitgeist. Finally, 8, I say that beauty, sublime beauty, can indeed be the result of self-expression, but this comes from an equivocation that we make about the term. We assume that both genuine self-expression and sublime beauty are free of deceit, free of pretense, free of sheepishness, opportunism, and every sort of anti-gestalt framework that I have discussed here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Bradley.
I forgot to breathe in the last 10 minutes, I think, but
Now you can breathe twice. Anybody have any questions for us?
I got a few, but I'll stick with one. I'll stick with the end. By the way, thank you. It's a really charismatic way of presenting. And it struck me, you have 8, right? Metzer has 5. And Metzer says of the modern composer, right, that the modern composer is most interested in this both internal and external view of things. And I felt like I was listening to an expository of Metzer's final thing. But my biggest question for you is define beauty.
Define beauty, well, that's the whole thing. It's one of the 3 Platonic virtues, and that's a really, really good question. By the fact of being an end and not a means, it's sort of, look, I started as a math major. I would hate to get this answer, but it's one of those, you know it when you see it type things, and you judge it by its effects rather than by its formal construction. And so any theory that we would come up with or definition for what beauty is, as soon as you found an exception, you would throw out the definition, not the beauty. And that's one of the things that it sort of proves by deduction that it is one of the sort of cardinal values, virtues, so to speak. It's sort of the totem by which other things are defined, not something that is defined in and of itself necessarily. or like I described in for Lar pour Lar, like apophatic is defined by negatives. I forget what the antonym of that is, but something defined purely by positives. Eventually, you have to come to something that isn't in that category. Otherwise, all dictionaries are just long-winded thesauri. I thought I would write a short story one time where it's like Sally went to the store and bought a tomato, and then you replace every word with its dictionary definition, copy paste, and then replace each of those words with their dictionary. Then eventually you got a 300-page book, just to torture the audience. But that's my answer. But I'll admit I would find that answer unsatisfactory.
So I have a follow-up to that, right? Because one of your categories is about the teleology of modernity, meaning the teleology of progressivism, right? That it always you're constantly progressing to quote something better, right? Or actually, I would argue that that is 100% the hangover of the 19th century,
right?
The concept of the modernity, but it led to the zeitgeist of truth is not beauty, right? It led to the motto of the secessionists. It led to the idea, to each time its art, and to each art its freedom, whatever, right, the secessionists meant by that, and depending on which secessionist you talk to, it's something different. But for Sternberg, it was definitely truth is not beauty. And so art cannot only be beauty.
Right. And I did say that beauty was definitely not the only thing, but I thought it would be something that could get beyond the purely material and unidimensional frameworks. But yes, historicism is one of my hobby horses, as you know, from my time in your class. It comes from it could be called progressivism today, but I didn't want to say that because it's like a very loaded cultural term. It comes from a linear view of history, so it can go back to Hegel and then Whig history and sort of liberal Britain, and then even that it goes all the way back to like Isaiah in the Old Testament, the first person, I believe. I'm no expert, I wasn't there. But to posit the idea that there is a linear trajectory rather than a cyclic or eternal state. You know, in the Old Kingdom Egypt, they didn't have an idea that, oh, this will be better in the future, but that this is what it always was. They didn't have a distinction in the 1000s about like, oh, the 80s had this fashion, the 90s, you know, the 990s. It was just like they thought that the world was the case, to quote Wittgenstein. And so if that belief does then create the distinction between truth and beauty, then that is the consequence of that belief, but that still doesn't justify or prove the existence of the background belief that then leads to that. I'm much more curious about the cause than the effect. The initial premises which lead to these results and then splits and rejoinings across culture and across time.
Can I question some premises?
Sure.
Awesome.
Please.
I think the thing that occurs to me most is the assumption of what the thing you're trying to describe called music is. Because I can speak quite specifically about historically in the European tradition for many centuries of intellectual thought in the European tradition, and I know also, of course, across cultures, if some of my colleagues can speak better. Music isn't a single object thing with a single telos, right? There are different musics and they do different things and have different purposes, right? And so, you know, if I'm teaching Baroque right now, something about Baroque music, explicitly propagandistic, right? The point is not to be beautiful sometimes. The point is the ugliness because you're trying to move the listener to change their mind and convert back to Catholicism. But you know, among other things. But also, you know, but different time periods, right, have these different ideas of what music is and what it does, and so much of your discussion is thinking about specifically 19th and 20th century art music, because before then, and maybe you've read Lydia Gare already, but before then, of course, the idea of music as an object is, or, you know, a thing that you can define a work, right, that one can refer to and talk about and think about is just not there. Music is functional. Like, that's its telos. It does the work it's supposed to do.
Yes.
And different musics have different functions, right? You do different stuff if your point is to get people to dance, and you do different stuff if the point is to make the king not behave, right? Like there's all, or the Pope, right? There's lots of different purposes that music has, or to just earn a paycheck, which is the majority of music pre-1800, right? So I think in part the confusion you run into and these sort of impulses that sort of describe but don't entirely is because actually you're not looking at one thing. You're looking at many, many, many things, and treating them as one obscures and makes this problem. Whereas if you look at a specific piece of music,
right,
then you can really get into what is it doing, or a specific tradition of music in it, or something, right? There's different ways in, I think.
Oh yes, and I agree, because I also, more on the concretistic side of things, just as a personal, as an individual personality approaching, trying to understand the world. I often gravitate towards critiquing many definitions because I follow, again, I quote Wittgenstein again, like you ask for the use, not the meaning. And so throughout this lecture, I've been criticizing the beliefs that attempt to summarize rather than the on-the-ground actuality of this or that piece and this or that place. I'm aware, like European art music is a weird sort of aberration compared to for having a distinction between music that's not for singing or dancing. Although I'm not an expert on much else, so I'm sure there are constant exceptions to every single sentence in the script begets an hour-long tangent. But yeah, so I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that if you are thinking about the 19th, right? I mean, when you come to the Sublime, right? That's what the 18th century is about, right? If you read those philosophers, that's their goal, and so different places and ideas are going to surface as needed in different places.
So I would love to continue this discussion, but I don't think it's a half-hour discussion. And I do want to stay on schedule, so thank you very much, Bradley. And